Okay. And I'm going to get the running minutes out.
We want to wait a minute or two. I sort of looked at who accepted.
Sure.
We are so far still missing. Oh, we can get started because everybody's here that accepted,
Okay.
except for Alicia, who we know will be late.
Doug is here now.
Right. So this, all right. Thank you for coming, everybody. We're going to do this a little bit differently today. It's a lot less formal of a discussion, I think. There are certainly updates to give, but I think they'll make their way in through the discussion. And we have sort of two halves going on. As I outlined in the agenda, the first half, I'd sort of like to talk about general like funding, activities, and strategy. And then the second half, once Alicia joins us, I'd like to talk about sort of switch the conversation more to partnerships and cafes rather than sort of big strategy and intersection work. Kristen, if you want to bring up that slide now, please, that would be really helpful. And I think you can share your screen, but I'm not sure. And if you can't, I think I can help you, right? There we go. Excellent. All right, so I think a lot of you have seen this before, right? Kristen gave it to us a month ago about in the last meeting. And I think it's really helpful for our discussion today because we have so much sort of going on, but we have not a lot going on in some ways, if that makes sense. The stuff that's going on is the C4 stuff, the populating the spreadsheet stuff, and then sort of refining our own work plan stuff. And right, we saw also last meeting or 2 meetings ago how we now have the PowerPoint slides, and I can bring those up in a second to talk about how climate is organized and what our sort of buckets are, right? And then aligning with that is the funding spreadsheet where we're trying to socialize that and get people to fill out project ideas, and we're listing grants. So I sort of want to talk about those 3 things in conjunction with the themes that are sort of boiling up to the surface. And those themes are really sort of broad in my mind. It's about resources and getting resources to the right places so that we can do this work and sort of better our own situations. It's about coordination. It's about policy, right? It's about support. And then it's also about sort of the historic relationships that have built up over decades and centuries through really terrible policies that we're now understanding are really, really terrible, right? They're not just terrible, they're really bad. So we sort of have all this stuff sort of circulating this conversation. And I think in this graph, we're sort of like somewhere in here, right? We have all this stuff swirling. We have all these good ideas. There's an ed component. We're not sure how all this stuff is going to fit together. And that's sort of what I want to discuss.
Sorry,
today.
Ted, where's the in here? We didn't see your.
Oh, in here, right? Where you're pointing right now, sort of there to the right. We're like not quite in the grown zone, but I think we're just there. Because we have all these things that we know are connected, but we can't figure out how to push them forward without all the grant money, or in a limited way without the grant money, right? So that's sort of what I want to talk about as a group today, because I'm struggling with this. And I could really use some sort of insight and help from all of you guys, because we have the CAPN is one piece, right? The policy is one piece, the C4 communities is one piece, and then the funding is one piece, and they're all sort of colliding, but I think we're missing some really important components that fit into this nexus so that we can thread the needle in the sweet spot. And I'd love just observations or ideas, or do you agree with me? Are we in this sort of grown zone and it's really difficult, or are we further along than I think, or are we not quite as far along as I think? Observations, questions, reactions.
I will chime in and say that what I like about the grown zone and what I hear you saying, Ted, is that these like orange dots here don't appear until you're in the grown zone. It's like the blue dots start to merge with these orange dots, the orange dots being emergent ideas. So I feel like you're saying we're at the edge of something where we have a lot of ideas of things we've done before, but we haven't quite figured out the things that we haven't done before. And those are the yellow dots we're trying to see come together. And then there's the problem of like, well, how do you get funding for that somebody hasn't seen before? But also, how do you not leave behind the important work that's being done at C4? And also, how do you even just like get ourselves pointing in the same direction on this team, because that's happening in all these different areas.
Yeah, and I want to add something, Kristen, and if you'll allow me like 2 minutes to tell sort of a professional story from my past, how I think this fits in, that would be really helpful. So in landscape architecture, and I think most of you should be familiar with this term, there's this idea called placemaking, right? And it's this idea that designers don't just come in and say, design a place that they think is best and needed. It's that you work with the community and the ideas come out of the community, and then that's what you design and build, right? The first iteration or pilot of this was done in like Georgia in the late 80s, I think, yeah, late 80s, when this coastal town in Georgia that was bypassed by I-95 brought this landscape architect and planner in, and he won this competition, but he didn't give any ideas. And he said, well, that's part of my process. I need to figure out what this is, right? So he basically moved to this town and he hung out at the diner and he hung out at the library and the post office. And he did that for like 3 months, right? And at the end of that 3 months, what he decided was, you don't need to remake your main street. You don't need to have plazas or trees, right? You need a community gathering point. So his solution was actually a fishing pier. And that fishing pier became the anchor to his placemaking. And then everything unfolded from that fishing pier. We need that fishing pier or 8 fishing pier ideas, right? That's what I'm struggling with right now. Go ahead, Bill. Thank you.
So, yeah, no, it's interesting. So I wonder, you mentioned that CAPN is part of this, but I wonder if CAPN is a scaffold for all of this.
I think that's where I'm trying to get, but I didn't want to say that.
Say more.
No, she asked you to flesh that concept out, Bill. Can you give us more?
Oh, I guess what I'm saying is, doesn't CAPN incorporate all the different things where, I mean, at least maybe not the funding, but, you know, isn't that going to be part of it would be how to prevent things that are going to influence policy, how to influence, you know, I mean, so first thing we're doing is we had the first workshop, we're starting to gather things, we're talking about another workshop on indigenous aspects coming up soon, I guess, at least in the early stages. And as my impression of this is, you know, we want to center nature in this, and we want to be able to have something for policymakers, for people who are implementing construction. So I think at least it's in parallel with all the other things. And of course, you need funding to make it work. So that's sort of my understanding of what we're trying to do with CAPN. But, you know, maybe I'm missing it, but it seemed like that was the idea that would, you know, sort of pull all this together, what's needed to do the different parts, and then would serve as the basis. The ideas for that would serve as the basis for going out and getting the funding. But anyway, that's just sort of how I thought they were, but I may be missing something.
I wouldn't
So,
think you're missing something.
ahead.
I would say we're trying to figure out how to make that come to our understanding collectively. I'm really excited to hear you say that, Bill, because I was talking about this with Laura and Ted, and it was kind of happening like this, but also we didn't want to just say like, this is how it has to go. So this, to hear you say that reflects, I think, something that we're all trying to maybe see that could be a fishing pier. But I'd love to hear from, you know, like Beth and Jeremy too, and like, let's poke at it. Let's kind of parse it out. What would work, what wouldn't work? What would be the challenges there?
I think-
I
go
guess
ahead, Beth.
a little bit too, coming into this, it would help to know a little bit more about the workshop that happened and the one that's like going to come up. So I don't feel looped into, I don't really know what's happening with, so I can't speak to that. But what I can speak to is there's talks about grants and funding and stuff like that. And what I do know is there's other people who are not here on this call right now that might be here if we had funding to afford them the ability to break out and do more of these things. So I think it's not a non-issue. You know what I mean? Like I think some people have funding and so they can move forward and some people don't. So they can't move forward. So there's like pieces of like some of what I'm thinking right now. It's like where and how do you what the way our organization has been involved with other grants, for example, is we've partnered with other organizations and we found a grant and then we all knew like what part we were going to write for the grant proposal, for example. So I think that is one tiny thing we might want to think about once CAPN figures out how they, you know, I do agree with this CAPN taking the lead and figuring out, you know, sort of the direction, but I do think that trying to figure out like how other parties could come to the table, what places they could take leadership for, and whether or not that could be something that could be funded over long term so they can think about it in a way that's more long term than just like, okay, I know I can donate these many hours and, you know, or I know once I get funding then I might consider coming back to this meeting, like I said, for the people who aren't here right now.
Do others agree that the CAPN could be a good organizing scheme for all of this work? Or do you see it as not a scaffold as Bill indicated? And it is a separate thing and we have 5 separate things? Or does this coalesce everything sort of under one house?
Yeah, we need somebody to play devil's advocate because we've heard some of these perspectives.
I'm willing to take a stab at a negative, Kristen. I am a little afraid that we haven't found the place in placemaking yet. We haven't found that fishing pier. And we need to think a little bit more out of the box in order to get the CAPN to be a unifying sort of scaffold. And by that, I'm sort of thinking about maybe some of the issues that have unfolded from the decades and centuries of our terrible, terrible policies, right? I don't know if that's, I think that's a barrier, but I don't know for sure. Maybe I'm too negative in my thinking that we have goodwill behind us, and I'm not sure that we do. And in fact, I'm pretty sure we don't, based on a conversation I had yesterday with the C4 group, where they were, you know, we were meeting so that they could fill out and put some of their needs into that spreadsheet. And what we heard was, whoa, who are you guys? We don't know you. I don't think I feel comfortable doing that. How's this gonna work? Do you get the credit? Do we get the credit? How does the money flow? We're not there.
Mhm.
And that, in my mind, is a really difficult thing when time is not on our hands. Right? And you can label that in any of a number of scales. I think one scale that's appropriate is, we know that the further along these grant cycles go, the more competitive they are and the less money there is. So that's one immediate thing, right? Another immediate thing is like, okay, where do we take the CAPN? This is, already becoming sort of unwieldy and frightening for some of us. Another scale is the 2030 scale, right? We have 6 years, 7 years to sort of put in these nature-based solutions for their maximum benefit. Otherwise, that benefit starts to go away. And I think, so is that enough of a devil's advocate, Kristen?
Those are great. Yeah, those are great. Other reactions, thoughts?
I'm just reminded of a lot of the people I've been talking to, because I feel like with the lens of education, I kind of talked to a lot of people about what they were doing with climate education. And there's a lot of great stuff happening in Chicago, and a lot of these people are partners with CW. There's a group I met with yesterday that's not a partner right now, but they're very involved with, I'll just say Urban Rivers. But, and so like, it's just like there's all these great things happening, and I'm not feeling them having a place as a peer like you're talking about. Like, I don't feel there's a peer here. It's like some people are designing it and developing it, and there's some resources there, but there's not a reason for someone to say, I want to join on with CW, and here's my spot where I can make a difference, and I would get, like you're saying with C4, they're doing such great stuff right now that they're like, why? And maybe I'm being too harsh, because I don't think it's that way exactly, but it's just kind of one of these things where there has to be a reason for them to put something in the spreadsheet. So
Yes, Beth, I think we are more value add to C4 than you think. It's that level, but I don't know what that level is. I don't think it's at Darnell yet, but it's certainly at Winton. He sees us as an ally and a resource, I think.
absolutely, and especially with the asset mapping that you're planning, because I think they see that as something helping them. And so I guess maybe that's at the crux of what's happening here, is trying to figure out different ends with what other people are doing, so they see CW as a resource, as a support, as well as a leader.
To that point, Beth, can I ask a question to you, but also to the group? From that point, how long could we, I don't know how to do this. Isn't there a draw tool somewhere? Okay, never mind. How long can we afford to stay in the middle of that groan zone and be uncomfortable hanging ourselves out there, right, to try to get these opportunities and identify these groups and take the time to build authenticity in a meaningful way?
Sorry, did you not want me to stop sharing it? I thought you were trying
No,
to.
no, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay.
So that's my general question. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was thinking about this from the perspective of something that Beth said when it was, all these great things are happening, but there's not like the placemaking. Okay, analogy I'm going to use is like the pollinators. There's so much fear and upset, like loss around the pollinators, but there's a strategy. People have been taught to plant milkweed. And so your own yard, your own pot can be, so for those who really want to do something, they can see what they can do, even though they're not part of the listing decision for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, right? So to me, it's like CAPN could work towards figuring out how to give everybody the connective tissue so that what they're doing, their place, they can see how they fold up into all the efforts, and they don't have to do something different, that people who are doing those good things would feel that they fold up into a bigger effort that they buy into, but they're not being exploited for that. They feel ownership of that, like, because they're the ones who are going to do that thing, because it's not going to be that we're going to try to figure out how to do that thing from you and go do it ourselves. It's that we need you to do that thing as part of our bigger strategy. And that kind of is meant to me like the milkweeds, right? Like we need you to plant milkweeds in your backyard. We need you to learn about native plants for your region. And then other people are working on the housing community association policies that outlaw milkweed, right? Because it's a noxious weed. And then there are other people who are working again on the listing decision. And then there are other people who are working on community science projects. So people who actually like are more technical. So there's all these like layers to the issue. And it's hard for me to imagine like how to build that out right now. But that's kind of what I'm hearing, is that we need to find a way that we all could collectively rally around similar values without losing our individual identities as organizations and as leaders.
Clarifying question, Kristen, can you say more about the values that you just spoke about?
Yeah.
Please.
So what I really liked about, and Beth mentioned that she doesn't know how the workshop went. We had this workshop and we had a bunch of questions like, what are you seeing right now? Like, what are you most concerned about? What's giving you heartburn? And then we did a session at the end where it was like, what is your one thing? Like, if you have one thing you could talk about right now, and I'm gonna give you 5 minutes and we're all gonna focus on you and ask you clarifying questions, what is it? And when we did that conversation, on the tables, there was these papers and people were taking notes and drawing and some mental models. And it really started to come to some people's excitement. And some things people drew were like, what, can we get a new set of shared world values? And like, what, really? There was, this like river on fire. This is my history. Like my thought of climate change is rivers on fire because I grew up in the 70s and whatever, So there's all these different ways that people came to it with their values because we gave the space to try to like hold those together. And I don't think that means that any one or other of those values needs to be elevated. We don't need to coalesce and agree on whose values matter, but we need to figure out what structure can hold these values so we can see ourselves reflected in the CAPN. And so those values could be that I really care about consulting with communities on their own climate action plan, the C4 level. And I want to know that that's one of CAPN's values. And I know that there's resources around it, but that doesn't mean I have to share the value of the people over here who want to go and fight policies on milkweed as being a noxious weed in community associations, right? Does that help? I hope somebody was writing that down because that sounded good and I did not write that down.
I have it in the recording.
And we're recording and I'm writing it.
Somebody else take that and expand or poke holes or something, because
I'm reminded of the energy that we had at our quarterly meeting before, Christian, you were able to join us. And there were probably like 12, Bill, you were on that call, where we had people all in the room wanting to say, okay, kind of wanting to know about CAPN, but also wanting to figure out like maybe how they could, now I'm thinking more of a Christmas tree analogy, how they could hang their stuff all on, what was actually happening. And so I don't know if maybe this ends up going to prep for the quarterly meeting in terms of how do you facilitate that, or how do we facilitate, the dialogue so that we create spaces for people to come together in a way. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but anyway, that's what came to mind.
Beth, if you have a Christmas tree in your house and you want to make space for everybody to hang their ornaments, how do you do that when you don't know the people and they may not trust you?
Well, I mean,
and that's not to you, that's to the group, right? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but like I think that's what we're struggling with right here, right? Like that's such a wonderful analogy. Like I can picture it. It's very visceral. And it's a wonderful analogy. We're trying to build this Christmas tree and make space for everybody to make a better world, right? It sounds sort of kitschy, but that's basically what we're trying to do. And so how do we, is it where the Christmas tree is placed? Is it how we invite people to decorate the tree? Is it, right? I think that's that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to wrestle with, because in my mind, we have a lot of the ornaments. We know who we want to invite, right? Sort of, but we're not sure that inviting them into our space is comfortable for them. Right. So where do we place the tree? Is it a special type of tree? Maybe it's not a tree. Maybe it's a Kwanzaa thing. I don't know. Right. Like, this is the kind of thing that I'm struggling with right now. And I don't mean to make light of it by relating it all to a Christmas tree, but I think it's a really wonderful example.
Well,
sorry,
maybe it's how do we provide support for what they want to do if in parallel to what we're doing, right? Is there logistical support? Is there financial support? Are there, to say, you guys are doing that, that's fine. We don't have to take credit for it. We'll view it as part of the overall thing. So, but how could we help? Maybe asking the question, how can we help you do that? In other words, provide a ladder so they can put it up on the tree, right? Or what is it that we could do to support what they're trying to do if it's aligned with what we want, rather than us take credit, provide support for them.
I'll be right back. Sorry.
So to me, what I hear in that, Bill, is the idea that sorry, there's like too many things flying through my brain at once. Yes, some people may want a ladder to put their ornament up high, but some people may want their ornament to be down low. Some people might want to put it, and so you're saying, how do we present ourselves in a way that says, what do you want to do? And then if you need a ladder, we'll go get the ladder. Or if you want to string it away from the tree, we'll go get the thing so you can string it away from the tree, because those might be the barriers. Those could be the financial, logistical things that we have within the CW network, but that individually alone, we don't all have.
And I guess I just find myself like getting to specifics that maybe like the C4 story that you told, Ted, that's really important, I think. I guess I wonder if we're, I think the workshops are great, like we're convening and trying to find this information, but but explicitly asking, what do you need to make your work to amplify from us? So for C4, it could be, I don't know what it is, but it could be, full-throated acknowledgement that, a blurb about this is what we are doing, and for it to live in your community, because we need more I don't know what it is. I'm making it up. But I mean, it can't always be everything to all people at all times, but for these work streams of people who are working in the same areas, there could be something that is simply at minimum honoring their work, but amplifying it.
I'm going to call out Jeremy, because you turn your video on, and I wonder if you have a reaction to this. I don't know. I'm just going my gut here.
What's the question, Kristen?
I want to know your reaction to the conversations, but I'm just putting you on the spot because I noticed that you turn your camera on and then off, and then we haven't heard from you yet. So I'm just putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I'm just listening now and just trying to multitask. I'm helping my aunt who's stranded, so I'm not as engaged as I would normally be, but more just listening now. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I was just going with my gut to see. Patrick, you're on here too. You haven't said anything. Patrick, I don't know how to call it.
Hey, everybody. I just jumped on late. I had a dentist appointment that turned into a dentist cavity, and then I had a filling, and then I'm 10 minutes late for the meeting. But I'm just kind of getting bits and pieces. I kind of feel like the Christmas tree analogy is really great with Ted. But I also feel like that we need to have more Christmas trees and get the trees out to people. because I think there are definitely opportunities there. I like the idea of the milkweed. We're doing the milkweed too, and I never really thought about this as a tool to kind of get people that maybe cannot offer a climate action solution. That maybe that is, from our end, what's one thing we're trying to do right now, get people to think about native plants and not just for a variety of reasons, but mainly for stormwater solution. And maybe it's that little seed packet that can empower people. Like maybe it's not the biggest ornament on the tree, but it is an addition to your tree. And we just kind of have to figure out a way to get those out to people, make those opportunities possible. So it's a climate justice scenario as well, because you're every little bit helps, and not many people know how a cap-in solution like this can provide really a good adaptation tool to climate. And we're dealing with flooding and stormwater solutions. Every little bit helps, and a lot of this green infrastructure implementation, whether it's milkweed or any kind of native plant, you're offering a nice solution. So I kind of like that, and I think the pollinators has been a huge story. We could jump on that bandwagon and see it keep taking us places that we haven't really considered. So I like that idea too. And just in our experience, we're dealing with a lot of water issues, and lo and behold, the monarch becomes endangered, and our website is getting flooded with hits about monarch butterfly, and yet we're not really, we're not the authority on monarch butterflies, and suddenly that's what everybody wants to talk about. So sometimes it's not exactly what you want to, maybe it's not the top priority on your agenda, but it is with the people that you're doing your outreach with. So I kind of missed some of the first bit of the conversation, but happy to engage people about milkweed. I love that.
Thanks. Who is 630-870?
AC.
Casey? You see me, I'm just gonna start calling people out because you're not jumping in. So you could just jump in to prevent me from calling you out. Like Amy.
I did have a question, and I'm not looking at the notes, so apologies if it's there. As far as like the pursuit of the grants, who would be the target audience for going after those grants? Would it be us? And then who would be, expected to put in for those grants?
So Jeremy, we have 2 or 3 grant opportunities, 2 of which are due June 1st. The first one is the reapplication for the January grant through IDNR that deals with urban forestry as a construct and main theme. The next June 1st one is an EPA grant, and that is a very complex national pass-through grant where they basically want 11 organizations, one of which is national, that coordinates all the other 10 organizations, which are based on the EPA 5 or EPA regions, right? So we're in the region 5, but what is problematic about that is we don't cover Minnesota, we don't cover Ohio, and we don't cover the rest of most of those states, right? So I would think it's very unrealistic for us to be considered as one of 10 nationwide pass-throughs for an entire region, but that's under consideration. And then the later one that we know about is also an EPA grant in August, but I haven't looked into that as much yet. So those are the 3 opportunities that we're focusing on right now that I understand. Maybe Laura can, or somebody else is knowledgeable and knows about other grants that are out there, can help fill in that that question that I have.
Okay, thanks. Very helpful, Ted.
And then, Alicia, thank you for making that point. And we're about halfway through the meeting, and Alicia has joined us now. So I wonder if this isn't a good segue into the second half of the conversation. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one thing. Kristen, I don't know, when we were at the workshop, you mentioned about trying to get the notes out pretty quickly. And you know, I know there's just an awful lot to pull together, but I think that could be sharing those outcomes with groups and then say, how does this land in your community? How does it differ from the site managers we've talked
Good
about?
idea.
So I think it would be helpful to so that people would have a better idea for it. And I don't know if there's things I could do to help. I'm happy to try and help. But it's, you know, if there's, even if it's not all the stuff, some of the key takeaways that were there might be, and I know it's a huge amount of material to digest, so I don't know what the plans are for that, but I think that would really be helpful before the next workshop. So I don't know just what the status of that is. Just
Yeah, I'm basically trying to do what you're describing, Bill, is what is the like takeaways higher level that I can provide in the because it's gonna take a lot of time to digest it all the way. But as you said, like after this meeting, the next 3 hours of my day are doing that, are trying to figure out how to create something that we can share to everybody that's like a quick and reacting to share, because I think that will help with building trust as well, because we're not going to keep collecting data and keeping it from other people. We want them to see it. And so yes, thank you. I will also email you if I see some things that I can ask you to do. I appreciate that.
And I'm happy to help with that too, Kristen. Is there more on the first sort of conversation topic, or do we want to switch to slightly, it's sort of the same topic because we're just switching to cafes and funding and partnerships, right? So it's still sort of the same conversation. It's just a little bit different. Alicia, are you prepared now to come on and share the cafe ideas, or do you want me to do that? What's best to do that?
Yeah, I can jump in
Okay.
real fast here. So back in August, when the Inflation Reduction Act passed and we had the infrastructure bill, I think a big question that's still lingering is how can Chicago Wilderness not just mobilize to pursue these funds as an alliance, but also support member organizations in pursuing these funds on their own behalfs there. And so in August, we hosted a cafe with Ted and a representative, Mike Brunk, from the Urban and Community Forestry Program at the IDNR. That was a high-level overview of the Inflation Reduction Act, some of the mechanisms, very basic tips or tricks on how folks can start sussing out what grant opportunities are most applicable to them. And there was a lot of appetite for this. There was over like 120 registrants, and I think like about half of those individuals showed up. So clearly there's that appetite for that. And in between, then there has been this kind of ad hoc group within Chicago Wilderness, in part co-led by Laura and Brandon from Bold Bison, Jerry Edelman and Emily from Open Lands is on that group. Ted is also on that group. And I know I'm missing some of those some folks there, but we've been meeting off and on to determine how can Chicago Wilderness mobilize and support member organizations who are pursuing these grants. And we figured out a couple of different avenues. For example, there is now a specific page on the Chicago Wilderness website that links to some grant resources at the federal, state, and local levels. The government relations community also added a portal so that Chicago Wilderness members can request letters of support from Chicago Wilderness when pursuing grant opportunities. And then also Brandon from Bold Bison and Laura have been leading on a spreadsheet that tracks shovel-ready project ideas with potential grant opportunities, as well as connecting those to the Green Vision initiatives there. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot of good work floating around out there, but I've just been thinking about like, how do we socialize this and familiarize this with the larger Chicago Wilderness Alliance? How do we garner feedback and get input from them about, is this even a useful direction? to go in before to see if we should course correct it all. And then also simply crowdsourcing capacity throughout the Alliance. I'm sure there are many people who have already delved deep into this area, have more of that knowledge of the grant process, who we might be missing out on tapping into that knowledge base. So I have come together with that group for an outline for a June 6th cafe. And I'm popping this in the chat here. And the objective of this is to just socialize that organizational work that Chicago Wilderness has been doing on public funding opportunities, but then also give space for Chicago Wilderness members to provide feedback there. So that is on June 6th. The registration link is now live there. If there are any folks on here who'd be interested in helping to coordinate that, our group is flexible there. Right now, we're still ironing out some presenters and speakers and how that flow will work, but I hope that this will be a good unofficial launching pad too. We've been kind of spinning our wheels a bit, doing some great foundational work, but I think now it's time to like get that out there.
Thank you, Alicia. Any questions or maybe observations as to who, since things are sort of flexible and open, do we have any sort of brainstorm ideas for who might be good speakers outside of probably Brandon has been identified? I might give context as an overall sort of introduction. I might not. Are there other faces and other people that we should include or think about in this? Laura?
I just wanted to update that I did reach out yesterday to Lydia Scott, Megan Gavin from the US EPA, just to see if there was someone on her staff that she could recommend, talking about the US EPA funding opportunities, and John Rogner, as was suggested. So they have all been invited to speak, and I'll keep you posted.
Thank you very much, Laura, because yeah, I think that that is a big value add there, having a state agency rep to give that perspective, as many of these state agencies and will be at least charged with administering part of these funds. And I think that was a major success of the August version that was focused on the Inflation Reduction Act. The fact that we had Mike Brunk on there gave some really nice insight on what it's like on his side of the coin.
Agree.
Bill?
So I wonder, Alicia, you were saying, that, you know, who to invite, and we're sort of looking for people we may not know about. Is it worth putting in the call for this, that if you have something you'd like to share during the cafe, we'll have a session where we give people that opportunity to sort of publicize what they're doing, that they think might be of interest to the rest of the group as sort of a segment of that, a small panel or something. I'm just trying to think if it's a way to identify folks you haven't thought of.
I think that that's a really good idea, Bill, because I was wanting in this agenda to set aside some time for breakout rooms for folks to elevate their own work, and then like a report back session once we go back to the larger group, folks that did have that input to be able to share it with the class essentially there. So Laura, we have that description in the registration link live. Maybe I could connect with you offline to include that to some sort of language in that description, that there will be this breakout session time for like interactive discussion there, and then also to share with the group.
Perfect. Yep. Yeah, good idea.
Do we want to formalize those a little bit more so we have participation, or do we want to leave it open-ended that there's just an opportunity to participate?
I think maybe saying that there's breakout rooms, or that there will be a discussion component to it, is helpful for folks, so they know that it's not just a presentation down.
Do the breakout rooms need to be themed?
I'm thinking about that now. I think it would be helpful to categorize in some way based on like subject matter area. There's a lot of grant money available for natural infrastructure solutions at the moment, and we can suss that out. But to your point about formalizing that portion of bringing in someone, a participant who has a bit more to contribute there and essentially handing them the mic. I think I'm a little hesitant to do that right now while we're waiting to hear back. Laura sent out those asks to some different agency reps. So I think I'd want to get that ironed out first. There's a lot of great energy here, but I am getting a little worried about stacking the agenda too much.
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Just thinking, maybe, is there something on the, when you accept to register, would it be worth having something about what particular areas are you most interested in that may help? In other words, you know, some way of, if we have ideas of what major buckets might be, to have people do that, that you can sort of think ahead about the breakouts, and then as it gets closer, you could do that. In other words, trying to learn a little bit more about what people are interested in when they come in. Is it funding? Is it ideas on planning these things, something like that, that helps you understand what people are hoping to get out of it, and then can arrange breakouts that way. It may help you arrange them later on.
I'd be interested in that too, Laura. I'm not sure the registration mechanism, if it would allow for something like that, because I know that we've done a poll at the start of the cafe that essentially asks a more specific question about participants' areas of interest there. But do you know, Laura, if there's any way in the initial registration portal to set that up?
Yes, you can set up a form that has like questions. Checkbox, or it can be checkbox or text based.
And that's what I was thinking along the lines of too, because if this cafe is an hour, it may be something you want to actually have an hour that could be recorded that people could watch later. But at the end of this discussion, have a survey so people could, like you're talking about, indicate even after they hear stuff that they want to be part of something in the future that could be scheduled as a secondary breakout group, and maybe somebody could participate in more than one. You know, there could be different, and that way it affords the ability of a person to say, I also wanted to be part of this and part of that. So when you end up convening that, it could be a separate meeting. Just an idea.
I do like that a lot, and I also like getting that information, at least trying to get some initial information before the cafe about where their areas of interest are. And then, like you said, following up after the cafe with a question about, like, would you like to continue this conversation?
So a successful way to do that is to create a Google form that you drop into the chat right at the end of the cafe. But then you can also send it out after the cafe again. I've learned just doing a poll at the end, like, do you want to get involved? Some people just don't even fill it out. They just get off the call right away. But if you hit them twice with something like that, it does work.
Yeah, and that would afford people who didn't attend but maybe watched it later, they could fill out this thing and still be part of a future discussion. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I can keep a link in the PDF of the presentation as well.
I think
Alicia, I think you missed part of the discussion because of your other meeting about sort of using the CAPN as a scaffold for most, if not all, of the climate work. And there seemed to be some broad agreement with that. If that's the way we're going to go, is there a CAPN angle to this that supports that structural idea? I don't know, but I'm asking the question just because it would be great to sort of do that if we think that's an important idea. And this may not be the right place to do it, but I was just thinking if we're really going to do that, we should think about ways to bring the CAPN into this as well.
do you think that it would be formed out enough at that point to do that?
No, but maybe it's just as simple, and Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it could be just a simple tease for a policy workshop. as part of the CAPN. Right, like we had a land managers workshop, because I think that's a legitimate component, or should be, to the CAPN. So maybe it's just as simple as that. I don't know. But
Well,
It could be as simple as like ways to get involved, since you're saying you want to find out if people want to.
true. Yeah.
Well, when it comes to, I do agree, I like the idea of using the CAPN as like the general template or scaffold, as you put it, for the rest of the work here. But when it comes to the policy ties with the CAPN, I think that, yes, like there is certainly, these types of reports are really helpful with having some sort of like basis and justification for much needed policy change or any advocacy work that we do there. I guess right now, I do think like that's such a robust conversation. Like I would love to have that conversation, but I think that that would be something that we'd want to dedicate like full time to. I wonder if that, I think that would just be a little bit too intense to combine into this cafe, but I would like to be able to do that down the line as soon as we could.
Okay.
And yeah, maybe we could somehow use this June 6th cafe to plant that seed. I'm just not sure. I think I need to just mull that over a little bit more.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, no, that's not a hand. I'm noting that we have like 5 to 7 minutes left of real work time. And this is our last get together before our June quarterly meeting, or is it July quarterly meeting? I can't remember. I think it might be July. I need to look. May, June 9th is, okay, so we have one more leadership team meeting next month. We don't have another meeting before the CAPN, or sorry, the cafe, and when these grants are due. I think what we'll do is just sort of via email, keep you apprised of how the grant situation is going. I think we're definitely going to apply to the IDNR NOFO. I'm not sure about the EPA, but we can sort of send that out and communicate that by email. Are there any missing things that would be helpful for either discussion as we wrap up and move forward?
So Ted, I have a question for you on the EPA. If we're not the right group, is there a group that
That's
has
what I was thinking
connections
of.
all across 5 states?
So I was wondering that too, Bill. It can't be a government entity, but so in this regard, I think it's going to be folks like that Midwest Climate Collaborative that is better positioned than we are, but maybe there's a partnership opportunity with someone like that. That's as far as I've gotten, and I can't think of who it might be that could cover 5 or 6 states and have the heft to actually do it well. And that was sort of my next step, is to start reaching out to big groups to say, hey, do you know anybody that's putting a team together to chase after this? Because it's almost too big.
Ted, have you talked with the University of Minnesota?
I have not. I don't know anybody there.
Maybe
All I know is the NIAX folks, but I don't know that they would be, because they're not allowed to participate. So I don't know that they would know.
No, they're now hosting the Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center from the USGS, but the university is separate than the USGS, and they do go for their own grant opportunities, and they have a consortium and they do cover the whole like Midwest region you're talking about. I know that they were trying to work with the Midwest Climate Collaborative, but it was like kind of one of those timing things of who's doing what. So
Yep.
I don't know if they're working on something. Maybe that would be wise. So it wouldn't be like USGS. It would be those people
University.
who are doing that work. University of Minnesota Institute on the Environment. So I'm wondering. I could send an email for us to inquire.
If you have a connection there, that would be great. I do not. And if not, I could cold email somebody through a website, but I don't know how those
Yeah,
go.
I'll send an email.
Okay.
Just an FYI, I just clicked on the link to watch their thing and it doesn't work. The link doesn't work to watch their presentation that they suggested we watch. So that might be something though that we watch and then come back and have a dialogue after. I don't know.
Mm.
If the link's- it's in
Yeah,
this-
I don't know if she just sent it to me. I bet, so go maybe to the link with the announcement, maybe has. Let me
Yeah.
look at that.
I guess my
Yeah.
point simply is maybe we watch it and then do a conversation after that. That's another way to deal with it if we want to get the
Sure.
information.
I think the links are here in this.
Anything else for today on a Friday that's rainy?
Mm,
I'm willing to give you guys 3 minutes back.
mhm.
It's not rainy
That's
enough.
worth.
We're not getting any rain. We're just getting dreary.
Well, we have rain down here.
Oh, nothing here.
Yeah, right, Alicia.
I think any of this grant discussion would be really effective and helpful. Our grant writer is right under siege. We need a few more grant writers on our staff. The amount of money flowing through the Chicago region is a welcome sight, but also a challenge. So I think this discussion could really be beneficial to everybody.
And Pat, that's a great point because, you know, we just passed on a grant 3 weeks ago that we couldn't get together for, not just because we weren't on the same page, but we couldn't actually write the outcome, right? Or what we wanted to do. So point taken.
The struggle is real.
It is.
Feels like we're going in a good direction. Just want to say thank you to all you guys. Really great.
I appreciate this discussion today. It was really helpful.
Good. Thank you. And thank you for participating. I think it was really helpful and clarifying. We haven't had one of these in a while, probably since the goal group work. So maybe if you guys are okay with this, maybe we make this one out of every 3 meetings, right? We have a discussion, we have sort of an announcement and a working meeting, and then we have the open meeting. I don't know, but that's something to think about moving forward. All right, if there's nothing else, I will let you all go.
Okay.
Laura and Kristen, do you mind staying on for a moment?
Nope.
Thank you. And anybody else that
Good
wants.
weekend, everybody.
You too.
Bye, Pat.
You still got 2 more minutes.
Okay, I will comply. So one of the interesting things that I heard and wondered, and I didn't know how to figure, I didn't want to send it to the group, but I couldn't get organized to send you through the chat individually. Prior to the earlier discussion, I wonder if a component of it isn't asking what
Somebody
the,
just entered the room. Can I let them in to see who it is? I don't know.
Yeah.
Someone go back.
yeah. Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. Bye, Jeremy. Hi.
Jeremy, you're on mute. Were you asking us something?
Oh, no. I had just lost signal and now I'm back in.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You know what? It's over. We'll give you your weekend back and
Yeah.
and we're just kind of doing a wrap up conversation to follow through on some of the recommendations. So
Which if you want to stay
Yep.
for part of, you're totally welcome.
Yeah, I don't mind if that's okay.
Okay.
yeah.
So the context for you, Jeremy, is Kristen and Laura and I met just before this meeting for an hour to talk through some CAPN sort of thorny issues, right? And so my comment here came up during the second meeting, but I think it's germane to the first meeting, where we talked about some of the struggle and enabling conditions and sort of relating to that placemaking comment I made, like what is the fishing pier? And it occurred to me, Kristen, as part of this conversation, would it be worthwhile to ask at every workshop, what is the missing enabling condition to creating and implementing solutions that we think are worthy.
Yeah, and we had some of that in the slide.
Right. We
So
did.
I agree with
definitely
you. Definitely to make it an intentional ask. It's kind of like, what are the barriers? What are the things? But I agree that it's not always written in a way that people understand the way I think that you're trying to describe it. So what other words could we use besides things that are getting in your way? What would be a way that we could say that gets at a different dimension than like what my brain just did, right?
Okay, so the reason that I thought of this is because it occurred to me that despite the feds having written all of these grant opportunities based on what they think is best, science, opinion, whatever, I assume it's science, but there's probably some opinion in there. Do they really have it right? Or do they just think they have it right? Right. And so that enabling condition question, I think, might show that they might not have it right. Right. And it might reveal the fishing pier or help reveal the fishing pier.
So this is
Maybe.
interesting because maybe I should get you this paper and ask you if we can digest it together.
Yes.
When I was at USGS, there was people talking about this co-production thing.
Yeah.
And what are, again, some of those enabling conditions for good co-production. And they were doing kind of like a meta-analysis across all of the casks for projects that had good, not so good. And I was really trying to understand that because they're trying to figure out how to put that into the grants, right? They're trying to figure out how to articulate that part of the rubric is that we can see you have co-production, good enabling conditions, so to speak,
Yep.
to do that work. And it's really, really hard. So I wonder if we couldn't maybe read their paper and digestion and brainstorm from there. And then we could use that to start to pull the workshops.
Send it and I will read it over the weekend.
I don't know if I can talk to you about it by Monday, but I will send it.
No. I just, that's when I have time to read it.
Okay, yeah.
And I will read it. And then you can talk to me whenever you want to talk to me.
Yeah, so I'll send it and then I'll also try to find us a time so we can digest it together.
Okay. That's all I wanted to mention.
Okay.
It occurred to me and it was germane to the previous conversation. It came out of the second, so I didn't want to lose it because it sort of threads in with the subject matter we were talking before.
Got it.
All right.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I took 3 minutes.
All right. Have a good weekend, everyone.
You too. Bye, everybody.